Man, Dad did so many cool things as a kid. He talked about his grandpa Smith on the railroad, Susquehanna Railroad. Talked about going to the rail yard and working with great-grandpa, his grandpa. On the weekends, being with Grandpa on the railroad was a huge talking point for Dad whenever he had the chance.
Well, yes, I remember a really good one when Dad was saying that his grandpa took him on the railroad and he was not supposed to be there. Like, he was not supposed to operate the trains and everything. Of course, you shouldn't have a kid that young doing that. But like, all the people, all the workers knew that Dad was there. And so it was a common knowledge, except they hid it from the bosses. So one time the boss showed up and he had to hide and he had to get down on the floor, and the other workers and Grandpa, Dad's grandpa, just said, just stay low, you'll be fine, just hide. And then it the moment passed, and then he started running the trains again.
I don't remember that story.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Get down, say nothing.
Yeah, he had to hide for a second while an inspection or something was being done.
Man, one of the coolest things too is Dad was on the first season ever of Supermarket Sweep. Nobody knows it. Because unfortunately, all of those tapes from that first season were lost in a fire, if I remember right, at ABC Studios. And there's no friggin' record of it. But my God, the stories that they had about the episodes that they were in, the things that Grandma and Grandpa and Dad won, and the story on how through Grandpa's job at Prudential Insurance, he got selected to be on this newfangled TV show about, groceries. The descriptions of some of the things that happened behind the scenes on that show were pretty wild. So one particularly fond story from Dad's childhood was with his best friend Herb. Herb was, and still is, this very, very tall guy. And Dad wasn't short, but in Herb's shadow, everybody was short. And they were walking home from school. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And Dad had his trumpet case. They always walked to and from school when they were younger, especially. And they were walking, and Dad kept smacking Herb in the leg with his trumpet case. And Herb said, "Smitty, JT, stop it." And Dad didn't. So he kept persisting, and he kept ticking Herb off until finally Herb just grabbed him, hoisted him, and threw him over top of a car. Just, here we go. Dad loved animals. Thinking about the story about the meadow voles that Dad would catch with Herb. He started, I'm gonna guess middle school or high school, I would assume. He got so good at finding those little animals and training them to trust him and to just sit there. And he would recount to us all the time about when he'd bring these wild animals to school and just sit them on his friends' shoulders, and they'd sit there.
They got the mice and they brought them to school. Dad brought them with Herb, and the teachers were shocked because the mouse was just sitting on his shoulder. And they were like, they didn't think that could happen.
I'm afraid of snakes, but he loves snakes. So he's very good to animals.
When I used to work at Giant years ago when I was in college, I was at work one day and I heard this commotion on the other side of the store. And I run up, and one of my coworkers, Shay, is there, and I'm like, "Hey, Shay, what's going on?" And she's like, "There's a black snake in the front area in the front doors." And I was like, "What?" So I ran over there, and they had this display rack of waters or something out there for people to just kind of look at as they walked in the door, and it had this little raised shelf. And I looked under it, and lo and behold, there's this beautiful black snake just hanging out. And I wasn't quite brave enough yet to get him myself. So I called Dad, and I was like, Dad, you anywhere nearby? And he's like, actually, I'm getting ready to pass Pantops now. I'm on the interstate. I'm like, could you swing by Giant, please? There's a snake in the entryway. And he came, and she just reached on under there. He's like, well, I got him. And everyone in the store, it was kind of half applause and half because they were all just like, how could you do that? And Dad actually took that moment to explain to some of the folks who didn't really understand the snake past the fear that they had of the snake. This is not a poisonous snake. It's not a venomous snake. These are very beneficial to the area that we're in. This is what they do. This is what they kind of help keep control of. And there are still some people in that store that will not go near a snake. But for a moment there, they were able to appreciate through Dad the importance of this animal. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping that maybe when they see a black snake slithering along, they're like, oh, I remember what Jim said, now get away. One of those. I love my parents' meeting, writing story, whatever you want to call it, fairy tale, whatever. To have met through a friendship club and written to each other for 6 years, that's something you watch on Netflix every day, But that's what they did. They wrote back and forth every single day for 6 years.
Jim and I have been writing for 6 years before I met him personally.
And then finally in 1988, Mom had the opportunity to come to the United States. She did have family in California, but she did primarily come to meet my dad. And she came over here, and she stayed with Dad, or she stayed in Charlottesville for a couple of weeks. Dad showed her around. She tagged along with him to job sites and all kinds of things, and then
we go out every day, go to his jobs, and I help him work with his air conditioning things.
Okay. She went back to Hong Kong, and I was on the way. And so she called Dad and said, well, Jim, I'm pregnant. And Dad said, well, that's all right. I wanted to marry you anyway. So she ended up coming back to the United States in December. And the next month they got married. And then, of course, in March, I was born.
I came back here December 4th, 1988. And that's the first time I saw a snow in my life. It had a snow in that before we wake up in that morning, December 5th. So we throw balls, me and Jim.
Was the day after she got here, so December 4th, she came back to the United States to be with Dad. And the next day, they woke up and it had snowed. And Mom lived in the Philippines. You don't see snow. You hear about it in myth and legend, but you don't actually see it. And so for her, that was such an exciting moment. You've left everything that you've known to be with the love of your life, and look at that fairy tale. We're Netflix part 2. It snowed. And that was the introduction to snow and Mom's first snowball.
I remember, Dad telling the story of, before he started his own business, just going from one place to the other, getting incremental increases, and he did see some bad things happen at some of the places he worked at, so he moved on, but he just kept moving on up until he was able to start his business.
I don't think you'll ever find a heating and air conditioning man like my father, ever. He knew his shit. Dad knew every in and out of that business. And if he didn't, he was ready to learn it. I mean, he was constantly learning. And he said if someone tells you that they know everything about the trade or everything about XYZ, he was like, then they don't. They're lying to you, because you can always learn something.
He always did the very best he could, and he did it not just for his customers, but for his own sense of worth and pride in his work. And he really valued what he did. He loved his trade, and he put his whole heart into it.
He was a master at what he did, and he mastered it every job and every day that he worked. And I don't think there's a person on this planet who worked harder and mastered their craft harder and better than Dad. And I think that's evident in the over 51 years of service that he had as Jim Smith Heating and Air Conditioning. You can't argue that. You got to be doing something right if you're in business for over half a century.
You know, Dad had his own business, ran it for a long time, over 50 years as a sole proprietor. And in years past, before I knew him, he had employees working under him. And there was one moment where he had 2 people that, and I should mention, he was paying these people way more than anyone else in the area, or way more than you would expect to be paid, because Dad valued their work and said, if I'm going to make this much, they're going to get what they deserve, because they're helping me. So, but one stipulation of that is Dad wanted the work done the right way. And for Dad, the right way was his way, but it was the best he could do, you know.
There's a particular instance where he had 2 guys working for him, and they were in the basement of our house in the sheet metal shop. And the one person was trying to do something a little bit quicker. So he was asking Dad, well, why do we have to do it this way? We could just do it this way and it'll save X amount of hours, minutes, whatever. And Dad's always said, but especially here, he had said, if you find a better way to do something, you tell me, we'll do it. If it gets us to a better outcome for that customer or that project or whatever, we'll do it. But until we do it, I'm the one who owns this business. At the end of the day, it's my name that people will see. It is my name that people will call or curse. While you work for me, you do it the way I want you to. And this guy continued to argue with him. He's like, well, I don't think your way is that great. I think your way is stupid. And Dad just looked at him and said, well, don't let that door hit you on your way out. And the guy was like, are you kidding? He's like, this is my business. This is my name. I'm the boss. You don't like it, you leave. And he left. And the guy who was with him looked at Dad and said, do I have to leave too? And Dad said, if you do the work well and you do it timely, you still have a job. But you're not going to come into my house and in my business and tell me how to do my job. I'm the one who designed the engineering form. I'm the one who designed the ductwork. I'm the one who designed the plans and everything else and all the other elements that went into it. I'm the one who bought the equipment. My name is on the truck. You do as I tell you. And until you can show me you do it a better way, you do it my way. And he always held very true to that.
And so he just cared about his work. He cared about his customers, and he just did it to his very best. And you know, when he wasn't able to do his work fully, I know it was hard. You know, with his more recent, stronger medical issues, it was hard for him that he couldn't be on the job as much as he used to be. But I'm glad that, you know, he ran that business for over 50 years and he put his whole heart into it, and it was a big success.
One of the biggest tips Dad ever got was because of a mistake. He was doing a job, bottom of pan tops, and he was installing a furnace. I believe it was in the not in the basement, but in the crawl space. Either one. He was installing a furnace. And he had read some of the diagrams wrong or something to that effect, and ended up installing the unit with a very important piece that had to have piping going in up against the side of the house. So he had set it in place, put everything together, and had to turn it. And it wasn't the customer's fault, but it set him back about a day, or at least half a day. And without question, he fixed it for that customer. He found his mistake, and he was like, oh, okay. And I do believe that the owner of the house either discovered it or discovered Dad as he was fixing it, and asked what was going on. And Dad explained, I misread the manual. I didn't realize that the piece that needs to be facing me was facing the wall, so I'm fixing it for you so that I can continue and hook you up with your heat. And at the end of the job, the customer, who was a customer even when I was in high school and in college, told Dad that, normal people would have just left it or charged me for an extra day, but you took the time because of something you did. You admitted to it. But more than that, you didn't complain about it. You just fixed it because that was the right thing to do. And Dad got his biggest tip. I'm pretty sure it was like $750 on top of the thousands that he had already made, because that customer was so impressed with him. And that was very telling of Dad, very telling of how he ran his business. Honest to the end. Never faulting anyone for anything that he did or anything wrong that he did. He fixed it because that's what you're supposed to do. And in the entire time that I was alive, and from customers who were with Dad before I was born and into my growing up years, there wasn't a one that had any issues prior to not prior to, but with him. He put in new equipment and it lasted 20 years. I mean, he just recently finished, within the last year, 2 jobs that were, one was from 29 years ago, and it was still running. That was the most impressive part. It was still running, but the guy was like, oh, well, I have the money, I might as well do it now, since you clearly knew what you were doing almost 3 decades ago. And then the other person was 22 years, and that was, again, it was still working, but he's like, well, I have the money now, Jim, let's do it. And you didn't find that anywhere else in this area, because I used to answer the phone for my father. When he would be out, I would answer the phones, and I would hear the customers and the complaints that they had about Dad's competitors, and I would hear what they'd have to say about Dad. And for 34 years, all I heard was nothing but that upheld honor and honesty that Dad always brought in every aspect, but especially in his business.
Like, I saw so many times where customers were thanking him so much, and Dad was giving them such good advice over the phone, like stuff you would normally charge for, like a service call, but he would explain the whole problem and then offer several solutions. Even in later years where he couldn't do as much of the harder work, he would tell them what they could look for when they go see someone else.
He helped older people. If they don't have money, he don't charge them. So I admire him about that.
He, from the start to the end, that was his thing, his whole creation, and he basically did it all himself.
And through everything that Dad went through, whether it was health or financial hardship or anything, when it came to his work, he was at the top of his game, always. And he never, ever, ever gave you anything less than what he'd have in his own home or what he'd do for his own family, ever. You will not find someone like him, ever, because there was no one like him. He was on a job site, leaning in his truck, and he felt kind of dizzy. And Dad was not one to shy away from anything that ailed him. He always sought the help of medical professionals. And so he had gone to his doctor, and he's like, I'm feeling weird. Like I'm out of breath. I am, I feel like I'm gonna faint. Something's wrong. So I can't put my finger on it. And so he went to the hospital, got some testing done, and I don't know how long afterwards. I'm assuming same day, whatever. I don't remember. He had parked the car, walked into the doctor's office, and the cardiologist came in with a team of maybe nurses and support team for him. And he just kind of stepped aside and said, "This is Mr. Smith." And Dad's just sitting there, and he's like, "What?" And one of the medical staff said, "We just watched you walk in from the parking lot. It's like 90 degrees outside. We just watched you walk in here. How did you do that?" And Dad looked at them and puzzled, of course, and he was like, "What do you mean?" And the doctor just looked him dead in the face. He was like, You shouldn't be standing right now. Your heart is pumping right now at 26 heartbeats a minute. It was either 26 or 36. The point was way lower than it should have been. I mean, resting heartbeat is 60, 65 beats a minute. Upper 20s, lower 30s, walking from outside. And of course, the first thing Dad said was, "Well, what are we going to do? I got to get back to my job."
I was at my cleaning job one day, and he called me, and he said that he needed to have a pacemaker put in. So he called Randy, his ex-brother-in-law, to come and pick me up and bring me to the hospital.
He, needless to say, had to be locked in the hospital because he wanted to go back to work. And they were like, "If we don't put a pacemaker in you tomorrow morning, you're not gonna make it." And so he stayed in the hospital that night, and the next morning the cardiologist comes in, puts his hand on Dad's foot, and he's like, "I'm glad you're here with us today." And again, Dad looked at him puzzled and was like, "What are you talking about? I came in every so often, but I slept." And he was like, "You flatlined 7 times. Not once, not twice. 7 times. 7 times." And he was like, you should be in the morgue right now. There should be a tag on your toe. You should not be here." And somehow you survived the night. And that was the beginning of Dad's life with pacemaker, because then that morning he got a pacemaker and had a quick recovery and right back out to work. And I still can't believe he tried to leave the hospital.
Well, you know him. He is more likely very much, a little bit stubborn. He wants to work right away.
Dad had a lot of health issues. It wasn't bad enough that he had the bad heart. He was diagnosed with a Mobitz 2 electrical heart block, which essentially meant that the electrical signals that you and I we do have, in our hearts, when our heart sends signals to pump the different chambers, his electrical signal to pump would never make it to those different chambers. And he ended up having to have a pacemaker because without it, the chambers would not pump on their own.
He was about to get his 5th done, I think, his 5th replacement. And I saw like the duration between the replacements was getting shorter each time.
I was only 7 or so when Dad got his first pacemaker. He was 46, 1996. I was 7, he was 46. And of course I don't really remember it then. I was too young to understand really what was going on. But as I got older and I was able to understand what Dad had, he was very vocal about, "I'm on borrowed time." That was the repeating message over many, many years was, "I'm on borrowed time." I think the last time we looked when they were here at Thanksgiving, the top two were pacing at maybe 40%. It fluctuated between 40 and 60, but the bottom two, which were the worst, were being paced 99.6% of the time. They would not pump by themselves. And very obviously, the pacemaker was his heart. And on top of all of that, from 46 years old, of having a device that most people don't get until they're well into their 60s and 70s, he had his hips replaced, and there was complications with the second one that unfortunately took feeling from Dad's feet and legs. And in 2019, I believe it was, he had surgery on his back, which was supposed to help with some issues in his spine, and that ended up making things a lot worse. And he never really truly recovered from that the way that he was supposed to.
Yeah, despite all those health issues, Dad always kept going out there. And it may have slowed down, especially in more recent years, but he never stopped working. Ran that business for over 50 years and never stopped working. Kept going on service calls and even equipment changes, and just kept going and going, and because he loved it, and he wanted to do right by his customers too. And he never let those massive amount of issues stop him completely.
And I just remember that it was so frustrating and disheartening to him that every time he tried to fix something within him to keep going, it just tanked more and more and more.
Yeah, Dad went through so much medically with the issues that he had from his leg before I met him to his later back surgery that ended up not going well. And just something that stuck out to me was the fact that he had all this misfortune, and he had doctors that were later revealed to be frauds, like in the first case. Like, that doctor lost his license later. But Dad had to suffer that surgery from that doctor who later lost his license, and there was nothing that could be done, after that. Like, once it's done, it's done. You can't recover something that's finalized, But something that stuck out at me really strongly was that Dad, yes, it was very hard. Yes, he complained about it for obvious reasons, but he still believed in doctors, and he still believed in medicine, and he didn't just say, oh, they're all crooks, He believed that doctors should have the training and the knowledge to be able to treat a person, because that's their job. I think he viewed it the way he viewed his job. He did the very best at his trade, and doctors have their trade. And so I think what helped with that was, his family doctor, Dr. Elward, was just the greatest doctor. And Dad credited Dr. Elward with saving his life when he discovered the heart issue a long time ago. At the rehearsal dinner for my wedding to Kathleen, I was with my groomsmen as it was wrapping up, and Dad was there, and one of my groomsmen, Sean, he was working on quitting smoking, but he pulled out a cigarette, and he wasn't in anyone's face about it. But Dad, it touched a nerve with Dad, and he spent a few long minutes talking to Sean about why he shouldn't smoke and everything. And Sean, thankfully, was very cool about it and said, oh, yes, sir, I know it's bad for me.
All I wanted to do was go to dinner with my wedding party. Turns out, he was scolding one of my friends for smoking. And, oh, Sean, God love you. I mean, he took it so well. I know he pissed off some people, but Sean was so cool about Dad.
Like, Dad always knew he was on borrowed time, He always said that. He would always tell you. He wouldn't hide it. And so I think he did overemphasize, you know, like not smoking and that sort of thing, and looking young, because he wanted other people to have what he might not be able to have.
Although it probably could have been presented in a slightly more appropriate, less invasive way, he was just trying to protect Sean and anyone he had ever had that same talk with, from what he knew was a really horrible part of the story. You know, it came from love. It really did. It may not have presented itself that way at the time, and it may not have felt that way at the time. Maybe it doesn't feel that way now, but it was always out of love. It was never just because. It was never just, you know, oh, well, you shouldn't do this because I don't like it. And, you know, it was always, I just don't want to see you hurt because of something that you can prevent. I just don't want to see you make a choice that's going to ruin your life. I shouldn't say it like that, but I don't want to see you make a choice that will have consequences that you can't fix in your life. And to David's point, I think a lot of the gripes and health things that he would comment about and irritate all of us about came from a very real space within himself, of just that knowledge of knowing from the time he was 46 up until when he passed that tomorrow's not guaranteed. And whatever we can do to keep pushing that envelope, you know, down the road is something to be cherished. And I think in seeing within himself that very real aspect that he may not have even made it to the point that he did, he wanted everyone to have so much more of a chance to have the opportunity that he may not have had. And I think that's something really beautiful, you know.
Dad was 100% himself. He never put on a front. He never pretended to be someone he wasn't. And like he was honest. He was also very kind and generous, as I saw with his customers. You know, not just with the customers, like giving them free service calls and stuff, but with his family and with his friends.
He never sugarcoated anything. Nothing was sugar-coated.
He always wanted me and for everyone to stick to what you believe, you know, no matter what. Like, you know, you can take the easy way out, but he never did that. Like, he never took the easy way out. No matter what the situation, whether it made other people upset or whether it went against certain things, you know, he always went for what he believed in. And I think he believed that that was the way to success. And I've seen that in my life, following that guideline from him. Like don't lie, don't pretend to be something you're not, you know. Go with your heart and be who you are, and just keep reaching for the top.
There were plenty of times that I had with Dad one-on-one, whether it was, you know, at a very young age into college. Had plenty of times together. One in particular that I remember, I had a little bit of an argument with my husband, and in an effort to kind of calm everything down so that we could sit and talk, I went home for a couple days. And Mom and Dad didn't ask circumstance as to why it was just me coming home. They just let me come home and be. And the next day, Mom had gone to work, and Dad and I brought her to work, and we came home, and we were sitting in the kitchen, and I, of course, had a lot of feelings about what was going on and what had happened, and I was able to sit down with Dad and ask him his thoughts, ask him for advice on how to proceed, I guess. Because of course Dad had been divorced. Mom was his second wife. And although I didn't have any siblings or anything else, Dad had that experience, whether he was divorced or not. He had that relationship experience enough, and certainly more than I had ever had, to be able to give me advice to kind of help me navigate the situation. It wasn't a very long conversation. It wasn't anything super poignant. It just was Dad being my dad. You know, I was his only daughter. I am his only daughter. I was his little girl. And I was always able, no matter what the topic was, I was always able to talk to Dad. And that was something very special, because, and I can talk with my mom, but Dad just had a way of talking me through issues that I had or problems I couldn't figure out on my own. And anytime I needed someone, that's who I went to. And I think that's one of the biggest things I miss about him. I mean, I miss everything. The talks, the stupid jokes, the offhand comments, the comments no one should ever hear ever. But being able to talk to the person who understood so much of so many of the different things that I went through. He's just who I always went to. He taught me to be genuine.
Be the best you can be, you know, reach for the sky.
And it's kind of something that reverberates with my relationship with my grandpa, Dad's dad. I in particular, I remember when my grandpa had passed away, and I shared a story about Grandpa teaching me the meaning of what it means to be alluring without, in a positive manner, and teaching me about what true beauty is. And I saw so much in my grandfather, what my dad did for me. I saw there was so much parallel between the two. And you know, Dad emanated his father to a T. Always clean cut, always respectable, always true to his word, to his workmanship, to everything he did. And he instilled that in me too. The value in honesty was never lost in Dad. Didn't matter what you were talking about. Didn't matter if it was business, work, family life, friends. It didn't matter. And I'm so glad I had that role model in him. Dad was fiercely stubborn. Fiercely stubborn. But you never had to guess what he was thinking. If he didn't like you, he told you. If he didn't agree with you, he told you. But you would never, ever have to guess what he was thinking. You never didn't know. Because trust me, the man would tell you. Good or bad, he would tell you.
He always wanted to do right by other people. And I learned, you know, from him along those lines, you know, be good to other people. You know, he was basically the father I never had, you know. I didn't grow up with that kind of support. So he was really there for me to teach me some of these life lessons that a lot of people learn from their parents.
Of all the lessons that I learned from Dad, the biggest one that I ever got from him as his daughter was that as long as I did my best and I gave it everything I had, he would be proud of me. And he always was. He supported everything I did. No matter how stupid or unsuccessful it might be, he always had my back. He always supported me. I don't know what kind of person I'd be without him. And I just hope in my lifetime I can do half of the things that he did and make him and my mom and everyone as proud as I was of him.
I didn't think I would be up here. Kathleen said something to me, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to say. All I can tell you is that Kathleen has made me more proud than any father could be. I'm from a large family. I'm the oldest of 8 children. I have 4 sisters and 3 brothers and lots of nieces and nephews. My mother and dad both died in 2007 at 78 years old. And Kathleen, fortunately, was able to see my parents and how loving of a family I grew up with. I tried to instill in Kathleen, and then when I met David, the same kind of love and caring, and to be honest, to make sure that you always did your very best. And whatever anybody else told him, and I just told this to one of his friends before, it doesn't matter who gets in David's way. I said, you make sure that you look behind those people at your goal, and don't ever not go for that goal. You'll be a success. And I am so proud of this young man. So very proud. I'm telling you. I talked to Kathleen a little bit, but she made the decision, and I am so proud he is my son-in-law. I couldn't be any prouder. I'm telling you, he is that good of a man. And I'm so deeply proud that he's married my only child. All right? So I love you dearly, both of you. Absolutely dearly. Nothing I wouldn't do for you.